Okay.
Everyone, I would like to call the June 13th, 2020 meeting of the University City Council to order. Ms. Reese, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Clay,
Present.
Councilmember Klein,
Here.
Councilmember McMahon,
Here.
Councilmember Hales,
Here.
Councilmember Kusick,
Here.
Councilmember Smotherson,
Here.
Mayor Crowe.
Here, thank you very much. Before you have the agenda, you've had a chance to look at it. May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Motion made by Mr. Smotherson. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Kusick. Is there a discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. We have no proclamations this evening. Before you have the June 15th study session meetings of the budget and the public hearing for the budget. Is there a motion to approve those study session minutes? Motion made by Mr. Kusick. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Klein. Is there any discussion or changes? Mr. McMahon.
Just to note, I'll abstain from that. I wasn't present for that study session.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Hearing nothing else, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. You have before you the June 22nd regular meeting minutes of the City Council. Is there a motion to approve?
So
Motion to approve by Mr. Hales. It is seconded by Mr. Smotherson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Hales.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to nominate Kristen Sobotka for reappointment to the Urban Forestry Commission.
Hales has made a motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Kusick. Is there a discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Clay.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Malik Johnson to the Urban Forestry Commission.
Clay has made the nomination of Malik Johnson, seconded by Mr. Hales. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Clay.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Michael Hart to the Library Board.
Nomination has been made by Mr. Clay. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Kusick. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to nominate for reappointment to the uniform and non-uniform pension boards, Mr. Thomas Jennings.
Has been nominated by Mr. McMahon, seconded by Mr. Hales. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Kusick.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to nominate Tim Dugan for reappointment to the Green Practices Commission.
Thank you very much. And just for future reference, Mr. Kusick, just in case you're speaking later on, your volume may need to be adjusted slightly. You're a little hard to hear. There's been a motion made by Mr. Kusick. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Smotherson. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. We'll now move forward. We appreciate again our citizens who have taken the time to contact us for their comments during this time. All members of council received their citizen comments this afternoon. And again, we hope that we're doing the best that we can during this time to take into consideration the comments that are being made by our citizens while we are doing these meetings remotely. We now have coming forth a public hearing on the map amendment to rezone 711 Kingsland Avenue. This meeting I will call the meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. We had two comments, as I believe, Ms. Reese, that the council received from citizens. And so we appreciate that from our citizens. And since that is the only opportunity for our citizens to participate during this public hearing, I will declare the public hearing closed at 6:35 p.m. We will now move forward with the consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda from the city manager. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Clay, seconded by Mr. Kusick. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor and council members, item J1, ask council to consider a conditional use permit for construct and operate a proposed total access urgent care medical facility. Mr. Cross will present this item. Mr. Cross?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rose. Good evening, Mayor and Council. And first off, I apologize because I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you tonight. But as Mr. Rose indicated, this is a conditional use permit to establish a total access urgent care medical center. It's actually located at where we all know the Pasta House is located, which is actually within the limited commercial zoning district. This is kind of a unique request in that this type of use itself is allowed by right or permitted by right to establish and operate. However, in our supplementary regulations, it indicates that any use over 3,500 square feet then defaults into the conditional use permit process. The reason being is because limited commercial is often closer to some residential components, and that the intent is to allow you to have the opportunity to look at these types of infill developments. So this item appeared before the Planning Commission as required, and they also conducted the public hearing at the Planning Commission where there was no, I do not recall any negative input on it. The Planning Commission considered the request and unanimously recommended approval of this request to establish and operate a medical office or total access urgent care with one condition in there. The condition is that they are asking that they get an extension for the conditional use permit to be extended up to 10 years. So you'll see it in the memo that was sent to you in the transmittal letter, and specifically, basically the condition is they are asking that the conditional use permit be granted with a condition that a building permit application be submitted within 6 months of the current tenant vacancy, and that the conditional use permit be extended for a period of not to exceed 3 years. So basically what that means is they were running into an issue where the current tenant there has a 2-year lease. If they can't get them out of the lease early, they can't start construction until after the tenant's out. So this condition allows for the opportunity that if the tenant leaves tomorrow, they have to pull the permit within 6 months. If they don't, then they have the 3 years for the conditional use permit to be applicable. Because in our ordinance, it talks about if you do not begin construction or establish your conditional use permit within a 1-year time frame, then you have to come back to council and request another year extension. So for their comfort, they wanted to do their due diligence and get that in advance. So that's really all I have to report on it at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have concerning this request.
Questions of Mr. Hales?
Thank you. My question, and if I missed it in the packet, I apologize. Is the applicant purchasing the property? I know that the current Pasta House leases it. Are they also going to lease, demolish, and then build a new building and remain?
They made it very clear they don't lease, nor do they want to be in the landlord business. So their primary goal is once they can relocate that tenant is to demolish the building and construct the new building in its place. So there's not going to be any leasing on their part or being a landlord. Their intent is 100% to own and demolish and then rebuild the new structure to establish their total access urgent care.
Okay.
Doing this as part of their due diligence process to make sure that they have all the approvals in place prior to the final purchase of the property.
And I assume they have a contract or an option or something.
They do, yes.
Thank you.
Motherson.
Thank you, Mayor Crowe. Just, Mr. Cross, just a quick question. Do they have a location for the tenant? And if not, is that part of what the delay is? If I'm understanding what you're saying?
To my knowledge, no, they do not. The current lease expires in 2 years, and their intent is they will not renew that lease if they purchase it and get the conditional use permit. I don't know if there's been any discussion with them, and I'm sure that's something that would come into place when they start talking about maybe renegotiating that contract or voiding that contract. There might be some sort of incentive they provide to help relocate that tenant. But that, quite honestly, that wasn't discussed at the meeting because really wasn't associated with the land use component of the request.
Yes, sir. And just real quickly, City Manager Rose, are we talking to Pasta House about relocation?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Smotherson, we have not had that discussion with them, but certainly we would about relocating here in University City.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mulligan.
Thank you. Just as a matter of clarification, my notes reflect that the Pasta House lease expires in June of 2023. So that would be roughly 3 years. The applicant of this conditional use permit indicated that if council approves the CUP, that it intends to then begin negotiations with Pasta House regarding terminating the lease early. Perhaps there could be discussions on where Pasta House would relocate, although the applicant did not say that is something that it will do. So nothing as far as a relocation in University City, but Pasta House is here for roughly 3 years. The other thing. The other thing I might add on this, it is, as Mr. Cross said, it is a bit unusual in that the code does require that there be substantial construction or basically operation within a year, and the council may grant extensions if that's not done. Here, what the applicant is asking you to do is basically pre-grant or grant your extensions right now for 3 years. So instead of coming back to you at the end of a year to advise you on the progress being made towards construction or operation, the applicant is asking that you go ahead and grant 3 years right now.
I think with the nature of this business that is pretty capital intensive when they're putting in the newer locations, and I want to say this sort of the right way. I think there's a desire by many of the urgent care companies to put their footprint in as many places as they can, because, and again, this parallel is not exactly the same, but it's similar to when you had all the mattress companies that had to run every corner to garner the customer. In this particular case, I think you're seeing that over the last 10 years for all of us, we have seen this part of healthcare completely changed to where urgent care didn't exist, and now urgent care is actually most people's first stop. And so the urgent care facilities are clearly becoming feeders into the hospital systems. And so it's interesting that I can see why they want this type of a deal put here. Then our risk, I think later on down the road, is just one where I'm not sure that all of the urgent care facilities probably in the long term will necessarily make it through. But that's also, we're pretty early still into this industry change to know that.
Honorable Mayor, council members, I believe that the reason the extensions are being requested at this time is because of the exposure that they have. They don't want to go out and purchase the property only to find that they're not able to reach agreement with the Pasta House. And so and then if we don't extend it, they've got quite a bit of exposure there. So I think from a development perspective, it certainly it's certainly understandable why they would try and minimize that risk.
I agree. So I believe, as I understand it, we are looking for a motion then to approve the conditional use permit. Is there such a motion? Motion made by Mr. Smotherson. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Clay. Is there additional discussion? Mr. Hales.
I just have one question, and I guess it's more relative to our code. You know, the mayor referenced these urgent cares didn't exist, 10, 15 years ago, and now they're popping up everywhere. How does our code look, and how we anticipate urgent cares to evolve in the future, and could they evolve to a point or a place where we might have potential conflict?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a good question, and that it all goes back in the planning world to the comprehensive plan, and how you reevaluate your comprehensive plan every 5 years to the changing times, so to speak. Our ordinance is pretty, it's relatively old. Our comprehensive plan is relatively old. That's why we talked about doing an amendment recently, and it really is based on the traditional land use classifications: commercial, industrial, residential, institutional, some sort of governmental type of thing. And then what it does is your individual underlying zoning districts are then set based on that. And in this case, it's the limited commercial zoning district, which becomes your regulating document. So then what it does, it takes specific uses and identifies what's permitted, what requires a conditional use permit, and what is not in either one of those then is prohibited, so to speak. So the short answer to your question is, in the long haul, our ordinance really does not, other than it says medical offices are permitted in these zoning districts, medical offices over, and then any use over 3,500 square feet, for example, in the limited commercial, requires a conditional use permit. So it really doesn't, because I think you've heard me say this a few times, our new comprehensive plan will focus on, hopefully will focus on character areas where you start to build and kind of drive where those uses fit into the neighborhood a little more, other than just having a blanket underlying future land use designation.
Any other questions? We have a motion and a second before us on the conditional use permit for total access urgent care. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor, council members, this next item J, to ask council to consider a proposed conditional use permit for the approval of a conditional use permit to establish and operate a proposed medical marijuana dispensary. Mr. Cross will be presenting this item.
Thank you. Thank you, City Manager Rose. Yes, as you recall, back in 2019, in January, the state adopted regulations for medical marijuana here in the state of Missouri. What they did, they broke it up into basically 4 different types of uses: the dispensaries, the infused manufacturing centers, the testing centers, and the cultivation centers. And the state as a whole generally regulates how each one of those types operate. But one thing they did do is they passed down the ability to set your site location standards to the local municipalities. So back in, was it April of last year, if you recall, we brought a text amendment to you that allowed for medical marijuana dispensaries within the core commercial and general commercial zoning districts upon the issuance of a conditional use permit subject to certain conditions. I believe it's 500 feet from a church, school, 150 feet from a residentially zoned lot. The state then, late last year, then did approve the applicants who applied for those, and we had 2 of them here in University City, and this was one of them, who then came to us in, I guess it would have been February, to begin to make their initial application to put this at this site at 6662 Delmar. So they made the conditional use permit. It went before the Planning Commission. It was tabled at that time, and then obviously we had COVID-19 come up and it delayed things a little bit. Now they've come back, and they were back before the Planning Commission on the 8th to evaluate the request. As a whole, the use appeared to fit. Planning Commission recommended approval of the request. However, the biggest concern is, as we all know, that site location has some parking limitations. And the current structure itself has 5 roughly 2,000 square foot suites, which generally should have had roughly 50 parking spaces. This use itself needs 10, and there's no parking available. So long story short, the recommendation was to recommend approval of the request subject to the applicant being able to meet the parking requirements that are off-site within section 42130 subsection C of the zoning code, which allows you as a council the opportunity to allow for off-site parking within 500 feet of the location through some sort of a parking lease agreement. So in conversations with the applicants, they are willing to enter into a lease agreement with the city to lease, I believe, 10 spaces on lot 4, which would definitely need to be in place prior to staff being able to issue any occupancy permit. So the request that's been passed to you tonight is by the Planning Commission is recommendation of approval subject to the applicant entering into a long-term lease agreement with the city to accommodate the 10 parking spaces. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Kusick, and you are muted.
Thank you. Can you hear me any better?
I can hear you. Yes.
I have a question for Mr. Cross. The 10 spaces that would be leased to them on municipal lot 4, would those be actual designated spaces that would have signs on them saying that parking only for this business?
Honorable Mayor,
Yeah.
Councilmember Cusick, I will share with you that the intention would be for them not to be exclusive, that it would be on a first come, first served basis. We've established a precedent for doing that. If you recall, with WashU, that's how they have leased the parking spaces and the parking garage. But as also a part of that, the revenues that we would receive from this development, as well as there's another development, True Hotel, that is being proposed. Any revenues that we would receive, I would propose to go towards the expansion parking lot for. And in both instances, they would not be exclusive.
Thank you. And if I could have a follow-up question, Mr. Rose, what do we charge them for these spaces? Do we have a dollar amount available right now?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cusick, when we did a market analysis of the cost for parking spaces associated with the WashU development, we identified roughly $100 per space as the going market rate.
And that's $100 for a year or a month?
That's per month.
Per month. Okay.
That's correct.
Per space.
Per space.
So they would have to pay $1,000 a month for the parking?
Is that accurate, John? I think it's $100 per month per space for, I don't know that it, well, it's $100 per month per space.
Assuming that is the number, and the code itself states that the fee must be the pro rata share of the cost of constructing and maintaining the parking facility, whether it's a lot or the garage. And it was determined for WashU after Public Works analyzed it, that number was $175 per space per month. And as Mr. Rose said, those are non-exclusive spaces. So a similar analysis would be performed for this surface lot. It may very well end up at $100 a space or thereabouts. And then it would be presented for approval that number satisfies the code requirement.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cusick, I just wanted to confirm, yes, if it is based upon $100 per month per space, yes, that's indeed $1,000 per month for parking for them.
And then if I could follow up with Mr. Mulligan's statement that there would be an analysis done. Would this analysis be based on the current existing cost of operating
Honorable Mayor,
the
Councilmember,
municipal lot, or would we be taking?
We had a little delay there on your audio, Councilmember Cusick. Sorry about that. I think John got the gist. Or Gregory, or do you want to repeat?
Would the analysis that John talked about, would that take into consideration a possible expansion of this lot, or is it just based on the current cost of operating and maintaining the lot?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cusick, typically it's just based upon what the market will bear. And that is, Wash U was a unique situation where we had an agreement that they would also include coverage for maintenance. That's unusual. I think in this instance, we're simply looking at what is the market for parking spaces. And that's something that, when we brought forward to you the Wash U proposal, it was market, what was the cost for the market spaces? And then in addition to that, what is the cost for maintaining the parking garage? This is a little different in the situation where we're really just looking at the market for the parking spaces. And again, any revenues that we would derive would go towards the expansion. I would propose going towards the expansion of Muni Lot 4.
And may I be permitted one more follow-up question? Would this precedent then jeopardize in any fashion what the potential would be for designated parking spots for the True Hotel?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cusick, I'm not sure that if you are looking at a public parking lot that I would recommend that the council approve designated spots. I think that typically for public parking places, it's normally first come, first served, and that's the precedence that we've established.
Maybe I used the wrong terminology and saying not designated lots, but just the use of the lot.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cusick, yes, the intention would be to at least recommend the use of Muni Lot 4 to enable the True Hotel to, if it comes forward to you to meet their parking requirements, but keep in mind that the revenues would be needed to expand it.
Thank you very much for my string of questions.
Sure, Clay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So we've got this, my question is more about medical marijuana dispensaries more generally. We've got this one on Delmar proposed. I believe there's another one in the works on Olive. Is there, how many are in the hopper potentially? I'm just curious.
I'd be happy to.
Sure.
If you recall, for right now, 2 would be the max, because if I remember, of all the districts, the state ultimately approved, and I'm gonna butcher this number, but the state only pre-approved so many of them, and in University City, 2 of them were all that was.
Okay.
So for anybody to even be eligible to come before us, or even for them to even consider it, they would have had to been approved by the state, which was a pretty cumbersome process. And there's going to have to be some sort of reapplication process by the state to start that all over again. At that point, we'll know if there's some more sites selected. What I can tell you, Site 2 has not made an application for the conditional use permit, and it's in a general commercial zone, if I recall, which would require a conditional use permit. And the clock is ticking for them. If I recall, they have to be up and running by the first part of the next year without some sort of penalty from the state. So my thought is they're not pursuing that for one reason or another at this time, because they would have had to have made their, I would have thought they would have made their application long before this date.
Hales.
Thank you. I want to jump back to parking. And I do appreciate the opportunities that potentially exist to expand parking lot number 4. And I risk sounding like one of our former colleagues when I bring this up, but how many spaces, because I think if it is expanded and we can expand parking lot number 4, I think that more than takes care of the spaces that we're talking about. But how many spaces in parking lot number 4 and in the municipal garage are available for lease? And is there a limit, or are they all out there?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Hales, this has really been on a case-by-case basis. That's been the approach that we've taken. Simply a manner that would enable developers to meet the parking requirements. So our desire would be that we didn't need to lease any of our spaces for the developers to meet the parking requirements. But we know from a practical sense that based upon the new parking standards, some structures will struggle to meet those parking requirements because, you know, if they lose their grandfathering, then it will just be quite a challenge. And that is exactly what's happening with the medical marijuana dispensary. The prior occupant of that space was grandfathered in, so they did not need to meet our new parking standards. The marijuana dispensary will not be. So I think that that the council will decide on a case-by-case basis.
And if I could follow up, are there areas, is the loop an area where the new parking standards for businesses in a relatively small, you know, 20 foot, 25 foot by however deep, where that creates a problem more so than other commercial districts or areas? I guess I'm just, my concern is at what point is this something that we need to be thinking about? There has to be a limit to, because
well, I think to Mr. Rose's point, what happened back in March of last year, there was an amendment to the parking code where in the past, when you have change of use, regardless of the business, whether it was compatible or not, those businesses were exempt. Basically, they had an exception that allowed for a new business to come in without meeting the parking standards. And I think, furthermore, to Mr. Rose's point, what this has given us the opportunity to do, and specifically in the core commercial zoning district, is we still have that option to evaluate uses that are consistent and with our ordinance. For example, if John's Tea Shop goes to Fred's Tea Shop and it's not been vacant for more than 12 months, then that nonconformity still exists and there's not an issue there. But when you get the change of use that could potentially, that's unaccounted for, we really need to have the opportunity to look at them at a case-by-case basis, because there's some exceptions in there that allow, for example, the parking lot within 500 feet. So that's kind of how we got here and why we're here. And it actually provides us more ability. I'm not saying we can't look at it and do future amendments, but currently we have a lot more control than what we did 12 months ago in how parking is addressed on those types of uses that could increase parking demand.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Kusick, I'm sorry, Councilmember Hales, I would just add that what enables us to, or at least me to make this recommendation for, I will just stick with the dispensary because I don't want to stray too much into an item that we're really not discussing yet. But what enables us to make this recommendation is our ability to expand Muni Lot 4. Without that capability, I would not be recommending this development. So that's the reason I say that it really is on a case-by-case basis. What I would propose in the future is to always identify whether we can create additional parking spaces when we're looking at the potential lease of existing spaces.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Crow. Mr. Rose and or Mr. Cross, I'm not sure who can answer the question, but you know, what worries me, and I'm just trying to visualize this in my mind. You have a marijuana dispensary where the customers are going to park across the street, walk across the street, and then purchase and then walk back across the street. I find that interesting, but I'm not happy about that. But my point is, I'm looking to the future. I'm not sure where their thoughts are as a business because it's not listed in our paperwork. But in a couple of years, not too far. I mean, I was at a Missouri Municipal League conference, and recreational marijuana is not far behind. So what then becomes of that site, and then what becomes of parking, if you understand what I'm saying, because that's going to grow. And I'm not saying that will be probably in a couple of years, if they're considering that. And that's just my question. Just kind of a concern about the future, and that future is not far away. So,
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Smotherson, what we're focused on at this point is just what the legislation allows, and that is simply just medical marijuana. Now that marijuana is, according to the legislation, should not be consumed on site. So I certainly understand it, and you can only hope that everyone that uses that will do so in a responsible way. But I do agree with you. We will need to make preparations for the eventual recreational use, sale of marijuana. But right now, our focus is just on what's allowed by the legislation.
okay.
Anyone else? Mr. Kusick.
Thank you, Mayor, for letting me have another bite of the apple. Mr. Rose, Mr. Cross, this is a medical dispensary, and ostensibly patients will be going in there to pick up their prescription medication. Is there any concern about having ADA accessible spaces within a closer proximity to this location?
Well, I mean, obviously the applicant is going to have to meet any ADA standards at the plan review portion of the process. There are 10 on-site spaces. I believe there is an ADA space. So that would be something that they would have to coordinate. And per ADA standards, you only have to have so many ADA spaces per parking spaces. So I don't see where there's going to be a need for an increased ADA space based on these additional 10 spaces. What I do see is they would have to understand that on-site ADA space still serves all the units on site.
Thank you.
As I understand it, those buildings do not have back entrances for the public though. So the ADA spaces are in the back. So that person is still That person's still walking around in the front.
Oh, yeah, I know. And that is something we can encourage with them because of the change of the occupancy class. We can discuss with them in better improving to reasonable accommodations, their ADA. ADA is always tricky to enforce from a new construction to a re-occupancy standard, because the way it's really written, it talks about reasonable accommodations with the understanding that some existing adaptive reuses cannot meet the code to 100%, but they have to do whatever accommodations to improve it. And we'd be happy to work with them during that process.
Mulligan, do you have a comment?
Just on that, you could create a handicap parking space in front of the facility because University City does control Delmar Boulevard. So as an option to accommodate disabled customers, that could be done.
Anything else? Is there a motion to approve the conditional use permit for medical marijuana dispensary?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Kusick, seconded by Mr. Clay. Is there additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor, item J3, ask council to consider a site plan review of 6669 Washington Avenue, known as the Garden Apartment Development. Mr. Cross will be presenting this item, and I would also ask Mr. Cross to highlight the research that you've conducted on the adjacent property.
Sure.
Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. This is in our zoning ordinance. One of the things that come up is called the site plan review process. And I don't know, I believe you guys have had a few of these, some of you in council. Basically what it requires per section 400, 2590 is for those larger developments that are not a single family residential or a 2-unit, larger residential developments or expansions of existing residential developments to go through what's known as a site plan review process. So what that means is that gives you an opportunity and staff an opportunity to really take a hard look at it and evaluate it and make sure it's compatible and consistent with the neighborhood. What this development is, they've come to us for a proposed 9-unit garden apartment on a standalone lot, and that's what's very important about this. But they want to, it's a 9-unit garden apartment within the high density residential district. And in reviewing this request, what staff evaluates is, can it meet its setback requirements? Does it meet its parking requirements? Does it meet its height requirements? Does it meet its floor area ratio requirements? And then most importantly, does it meet its density requirements as defined by the underlying zoning district and the supplementary regulations? And in looking at the size of this lot, it's roughly a 0.27 acre lot, they could have up to 9.5 units on this lot, and they are proposing 9. So what the process is that staff reviews it, we prepare a report, we present it to you as a council for your review and approval. Now, to Mr. Rose's point about the research, the biggest issue with this, it meets everything across the board. The biggest issue with this proposed development is it abuts another multifamily residential development that has no parking. And that has been there forever. I mean, it's clearly legal, non-conforming or grandfathered. Staff, when we looked at it, the first concern was, okay, does that parking lot serve the property adjacent to that has no parking? We did research, we did title reports, we worked with the applicant. There has been no documentation that we have ever found that shows any parking agreement, any attachment of that, any dedication of that lot to accommodate the parking for the lot to the north or to adjacent to it. So based upon that, staff looked at the proposed use. It meets the on-site requirements. It was our opinion that we could not recommend denial based on the shortcomings of an adjacent lot that it legally has no tie to. So based on meeting all the standards that we have reviewed and per our zoning ordinance, it meets the requirements, including parking. So that was the dilemma, but we are bringing it to you tonight for your, per the ordinance, for your review and approval, so the applicant can move forward with the permitting process for the construction of the 9 units. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have concerning this.
And
Just a few. So the owner of the apartment building to the west also owns the parking lot.
Correct.
And so if you look at the overhead shot, there's concrete stairs that go from the parking lot to that. And so this guy owns both of those and maintains them. And
Absolutely. But
I'm looking at a Google Docs picture, and I swear there's a red and white sign that says this is reserved for tenants.
they're what?
I'm looking at a Google Maps picture, looking from the south, from Loop South, kind of going in where they would pull in. And I swear the sign says this is reserved for tenants.
Well, and
So did anybody ask for leases of tenants to see if they have any guaranteed spots?
I did not, but I have talked to the owner of the property adjacent to it, who says that they do not have any agreements to lease those. In fact, they have been, my understanding is they have continuously removed or tried to remove vehicles from tenants that they say were illegally parked or trespassing on their property. I agree 100%. I mean, I don't doubt at one time that they've been used.
Who parks there? I mean, I don't want to argue, but I mean, then who parks there?
I know, but legally from a zoning standpoint, and I consulted with Mr. Mulligan on this, from a zoning standpoint, this is a standalone lot with no legal ties or agreements. And in our review, it meets the requirements, and for the highest and best use for that lot, the concern is, what is our basis to deny it on? I mean, obviously that's your call and legal counsel's call, but we have to, our recommendation has to be based upon the use of the lot. Is it in compliance per our ordinance? And it meets the requirements of our ordinance on that standalone lot.
And I mean, my concern is because if you look at page J310, they included an earlier rendering of what this looked like, and it looks like they had 4-bedroom units, and there were going to be six units with 4 bedrooms, and they probably were told you can't have 4 unrelated people, and we're talking about student housing.
Yes, you're exactly right. That's why they went to 9.
And their use with student housing and the way they park, they're given basically two spots per unit, and they're probably going to have 3 people in each, if not occasionally, knowing how students do it, an extra person. And if all of them are driving, plus the 21 that are going to get kicked off the lot that might be using it and living in the apartment, the residents that live down in that area are going to be fighting for parking spots continually. So I mean, it just, to me, this doesn't pass the smell test to me. I mean, that's where I'm at on this. So I would like to know more about this. I tried to do a little bit of research to see what the leasing agency said about that apartment building next, if they make any discussions about it, but about parking, I couldn't find it. But my gut tells me is that that's what that's being used for. And this is just going to generate more problems for us in that area and for our residents.
Other questions?
Mr.
Hales.
The city manager, please.
I just wanted to, just to clarify, Mr. Cross, I believe that the research that you conducted found that there were 2 separate owners. Is that accurate? It's not the same owner of the proposed development, does not own the actual apartment complex that is to the west.
He will not. They will not. They are purchasing it. The contiguous lots are under the common ownership at this time. Now, what the intent of that was, I can't tell you, but my understanding is that was never purchased to accommodate the parking, nor are there any agreements to verify that is the parking for that property.
Well, I just want to confirm, currently there are two separate owners.
No.
There is so he
No.
owns both lots?
Yes.
Okay. Mayor, I would ask for this item to be continued.
Mr. Rose, do you want some questions to continue, or do you want to just take it off?
No, I would ask to take it off.
There's not a motion before the body at this time, so I don't even know that I have to have a motion to take it off. I would suggest to my colleagues that if you have additional questions regarding this matter, that you address them to Mr. Rose, and then we'll move forward when this item comes back on the agenda. Mr. Hales?
I just wanted to thank Councilmember McMahon, who got out everything and more that I wanted to say on this issue. So thank you.
Okay. All right. With that, Mr. Rose, I believe that concludes the city manager's report.
That is correct, Mayor.
Okay, we will now move forward.
Mayor Crowe,
I'm sorry.
I think Alita wanted to say something.
Oh, I apologize. Did I miss a hand? I apologize, Alita. Forgive me.
I just have a quick question on that before we move on. So if the one owner owns both of them now, is he trying to sell it to someone else?
Yes.
So the person that is going to buy it is putting the proposal forth?
Yes. It's part
Okay.
of the due diligence. Yes,
But
ma'am.
it's not sold yet.
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mulligan, we're not moving off this item yet, but okay.
Sorry. Just as a matter, to let you know, I did speak with the current owner of the lot, and he's told me, and as well as his attorney, and they assured me that the two lots are owned by different individuals, that the 6675, which is the apartment building to the west, is owned by a gentleman who no longer has any interest in the lot. But when you look at the St. Louis County records, you see both individuals on it, and it's confusing. And they explained to me, that is the owner of this lot, that at one point that they did share ownership, but no longer do. And the owner of the lot said, I am closing that lot off so nobody next door can use it. So if they're asserting any rights, they're not getting them right now because I'm closing it off. In fact, he informed me that the guy who owns the apartment building to the west is actually renting spaces from Coca.
Which to clarify, you're
to me,
I'm not disputing that. What I was saying though, at one time, this was Big Lou Properties who sold it off to two separate entities. So for clarification, my thought was, your question was, it was commonly owned at one time for the establishment of the apartment, and this is the parking. That was the common ownership.
Honorable Mayor and council members, there's clearly confusion on this item. If it is appropriate, it would be my intention to agendize it at a later date.
Good. Let's move forward to the unfinished business that we have for this evening. We have before us bill number 9407. Ms. Reese, may we have the second reading?
An ordinance amending chapter 400.070 of the municipal code of the city of University City, Missouri, relating to the official zoning map by amending said map so as to change the classification of property at 711 Kingsland Avenue from Public Activity District, PA, to Planned Development Commercial District, PDC, and establishing permitted land uses and developments therein, containing a savings clause and providing a penalty.
We have the third reading.
An ordinance amending chapter 400.070 of the Municipal Code of the City of University City, Missouri, relating to the official zoning map by amending said map so as to change the classification of property at 711 Kingsland Avenue from Public Activity District, PA, to Planned Development Commercial District, PDC, and establishing permitted land uses and developments therein, containing a savings clause and providing a penalty.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Mr. Kusick. There is a second by Mr. Hales. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Klein. You're muted.
You need to unmute. Sorry, Alita. Sorry.
Aye.
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Councilmember Hales.
Aye.
Councilmember Kusick.
Aye.
Councilmember Motherson.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Mayor Crowe.
Aye. Thank you very much. We'll now move forward to Bill number 9408. May we have the second reading?
An ordinance fixing the compensation to be paid to city officials and employees as enumerated herein from and after its passage and repealing ordinance number 7120.
May we have the third reading?
An ordinance fixing the compensation to be paid to city officials and employees as enumerated herein from and after its passage and repealing ordinance number 7120.
Motion to approve. Motion by Mr. Kusick, seconded by Mr. Smotherson. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Councilmember Hales.
Aye.
Councilmember Kusick.
Aye.
Councilmember Smotherson.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Klein.
Aye.
Mayor Crowe.
Aye. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We'll now move forward to new business. Resolution number 2020-7. Is there a motion to approve?
To introduce.
I'm sorry. Is there, well, introduced and then a second. Introduced by Mr. Smotherson. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Klein. This is regarding the True Development Hotel as well. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Now I have resolution number 2020-8. Is there a motion to approve?
So
Motion
moved.
by Mr. Clay, seconded by Mr. Hales. There was a pregnant pause on that one. Motion to approve resolution 2020-8. Is there discussion?
Yes, sir. Just a point of clarification. Where is this area specifically? Is this at the new Olive and 170 development?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Kusick, that is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. We'll now move forward to the first reading of bill number 9409. Who would like to introduce? Mr. Smotherson. May we have the first reading?
An ordinance amending section 215.720 of the Municipal Code of the City of University City, Missouri, relating to obstructing public places.
Thank you very much. We'll now move forward to bill number 9410. Who would like to introduce? Mr. Kusick, may we have the first reading, Ms. Reese?
An ordinance approving an amended and restated petition to establish a community improvement district, establishing the markets at Olive Community Improvement District as a political subdivision of the state of Missouri, directing the city clerk to notify the Missouri Department of Economic Development of the creation of the district and approving a district project agreement in connection therein.
Thank you very much. That concludes the new business portion of our meeting. We'll now move forward to council reports and business. Are there any items that any of our colleagues would like to speak on this evening? under this section? Hearing none, let's move forward to council comment. Are there comments that individual council members would like to make prior to adjournment? I don't sense any of my colleagues have any comments to make. I have just a few. First, I would like to thank our school board for the action that they took last week, and the administration as well. I know that I think the vast majority of the citizens of University City thank them for taking the next step in a tough decision. Also, I would like to very quickly say to Judy Prangy at UC and Bloom, happy birthday. I see she celebrated with quite a bit of fanfare over the weekend. Mr. McMahon had a birthday as well. I don't think quite as much fanfare as Ms. Prangy. And I believe Mr. Smotherson, it may be your birthday today. Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Happy birthday
happy birthday
to you.
Well,
we're
thank
glad you chose to spend part of your birthday with us. And finally, I think as Mr. Rose and I continually say when we have our updates to our citizens, to all of you, thank you for staying home. We also hope that you will support our businesses in University City, in particular our restaurants, either by takeout or by whatever means you choose. Please keep your social distance. Please wash your hands. Please wear masks. And we will get through this as soon as we possibly can. With that, could we have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn by Mr. Hale, seconded by Mr. Kusick. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening.